Welcome along to another episode of the Play On Podcast, your weekly instalment of all things Scottish football. I'm David Simmons. As always, I'm delighted to be joined by Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons. So stay tuned for the next hour as we welcome these guys onto the show. As we do every week, we're going to be discussing Scotland's major talking points from the past 7 days. On tonight's show, we're asking the question, does the debacle end Celtic's decade of domination? A nice bit of alliteration there for you. So we want to hear from you. We're fully interactive. We're live at the moment until 7 o'clock. Do get in touch, drop us a message, let us know your thoughts on any of the subjects that we're discussing on tonight's show. Don't forget as well, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I say this every week, subscribe to our YouTube channel, A State of Mind, and also hop on over to Twitter and follow the Play On Podcast. Right, let's not muck about anymore. Let's get cracking with tonight's show. The whole Dubai debacle. Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, we covered a lot of it kind of hypothetically last week in terms of what it could mean and the ramifications that could come from this trip. But I mean, this is supposed to be a football podcast that covers every facet of Scottish football, and it seems to be dominated every single week by something that Celtic have done wrong. And it's just an absolute comedy of errors from supposedly the biggest club in Scotland, undoubtedly one of the big two. They're being run worse than an amateur team at the moment. It's just mistake after mistake after mistake. The fact that they went on this trip in the first place was laughable, just a disgraceful. They didn't read the room. They didn't read what people were thinking and their own fans. They didn't take any of that into consideration. They decided to go. They thought that just by getting government consent to go on this trip that it was all going to be all good. But they're now faced with a situation that a player. So they went on this trip and were questioned by the First Minister publicly. What was the point of this trip? And they specifically said, this is not a team building exercise. It's not something that we're sending the boys away for a jolly. This is a hard training camp that we're sending these players on to get their fitness levels right in warm weather training. And it's really important to us. The question then needs to be asked, why did they take Christopher Jullien, a man who they have publicly admitted is out for the next 3 or 4 months, to a trip that was fundamentally about training? So, but by the by, they took him, they brought him back, and now they're faced with a situation where they have a player in Christopher Jullien who's been diagnosed with COVID positive test, which happens to the best of teams. It can happen to anybody. But because they've gone on this trip, in normal circumstances, if Christopher Jullien got COVID, they would be looking at potentially 2 or 3 players maximum that would be missing for a game, because it would be guys that maybe sat next to him at training or sat next to him on a bus on the way from training or whatever it may be. But because of the situation that surrounded their last 3 or 4 days in Dubai, travelling to and from the airport, hotel rooms, training facilities, in the aeroplane itself, there has been 13 bodies plus the 2 managers, or the manager and the assistant manager, who have now been identified as close contacts and are now having to isolate. It goes from bad to worse for Celtic, and it's now that they are becoming the laughingstock of not only Scottish football but British football.
Exactly. I mean, just before we come on air, I was watching Sky Sports News there just now, and it is one of their key stories, Anthony. Is Stephen right? Is it putting us up here in Scotland a bit of a laughingstock, or Celtic to blame for that?
I don't think it's making Scottish football a laughingstock as such as making Celtic a laughingstock. I mean, as we discussed last week, they shouldn't have gone to Dubai. I think that was obvious to pretty much everybody, even before they went. I understand them booking it at the time, back in November or whenever they decided to book it, because the situation was nowhere near as sort of critical as it is now. However, it was pretty clear over the Christmas period that things were deteriorating across the globe, and particularly in Britain, to the extent where you would have thought Celtic would have had a rethink over the Christmas period about the sort of the logic of going to Dubai in this period, not only in terms of could they keep their players safe, but how it would look to the wider world. And as Stephen says, pretty much everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Let's be honest, had they've got absolutely hammered over the past week, but had they come home, nobody had contracted COVID, and they had won the game tonight against Hibs, that would have probably been the last we heard about it for a wee while. It would have probably, the agenda would have moved on, but it just transpires that Christopher just sort of sums up the way things are going for Celtic. Christopher Jullien, who, as Stephen said, probably shouldn't have gone on the trip, injured, is the guy who happens to test positive for COVID. and then they have this situation where everybody has to isolate ahead of the Hibs game. So it is the worst case scenario in terms of this situation unfolding. Fundamentally, it just comes back to them deciding to go to Dubai last week. It doesn't matter whether they were out having beers or not. That's by the by. It's the fact they went to Dubai, and it's a completely flawed decision. There's no going back on it. I saw Derek Ray tweeting today saying that the German teams who usually go away on a winter jolly, if you like, or team bonding session, training, exercise in the warm weather, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is, club to club, the German teams didn't do it. Rangers and Aberdeen often go to Dubai in the winter at the same time as Celtic. Neither of them have gone. I think that tells a story. You might argue that it was a financial decision for Aberdeen first and foremost, because obviously they'll be feeling it a little bit more than Rangers and Celtic will. But fundamentally, those two clubs didn't go, and those two clubs tend to go to Dubai at this time of year. They thought better of it. I don't think anybody can understand why Celtic have actually gone ahead with this trip, and it's just deteriorated into a complete disaster on so many levels. I mean, they'll come through it. They'll play tonight. They might well win the game, depending who the players are that are available. But it doesn't necessarily ease the situation. Celtic have made a massive cock up here, and I think what's made it worse is they haven't really shown any sort of contrition, any remorse is maybe a strong word, but in terms, they haven't really acknowledged that they've made a flawed decision here, and I think that's the thing that's really getting people's back up. If they came out and said, right, okay, we maybe should have reviewed this, and we maybe shouldn't have gone, I think some people would hold their hands up and say, fair enough. But it's the fact that they're almost sticking to their guns that this was not their fault, that they've gone in the absolute height of the pandemic. And I mean, to be fair, timing has conspired against them in terms of the lockdown all coming while they've been away. That isn't necessarily Celtic's fault, but the fact is, the writing has been on the wall for the whole nation over the past month that things are going in a downward direction in terms of the world's population, particularly the British population, in terms of this new strain. And I just think a bit of decorum just from the Celtic hierarchy, and I take that all the way up to Peter Lawwell and even above. Someone should have pulled the plug on this trip, whether that was Neil Lennon or somebody above. It should never have got to the point where they got on that plane a week and a half ago.
No, absolutely. Thanks to Danny for the message. What about Maxwell and the SPL fully backing Celtic over Dubai again today? Stephen, did you see the comment that Maxwell came out from the SPL and basically not condemned it but didn't really shoot it down?
I mean, what they're saying is basically Celtic have not broken any rules. Like, they're not there, like the SPL, the SPFL, no one is there to pass judgment on how good or bad a decision is that Celtic made. At the end of the day, they're there as arbitrators, and they're there to kind of interpolate the rules that are set out in place for all clubs. And all their job is to say Celtic have not actually broken any rules here. Whether if it then comes to light that they have broken rules in terms of the things that St Mirren and Kilmarnock were punished with earlier in the season, they were little simple things like people car sharing and guys not social distancing, and they were caught out and quite rightly punished for what happened. But in terms of what we've seen, in terms of the photos that were sent kind of around the social media world, again, they were all taken by other people in the hotel and fans and things. It can be construed to kind of seem a certain way, or I don't think if Celtic had broken any rules, the First Minister, Jason Leach, or one of the guys from the Joint Response Group, as well as Ian Maxwell and Neil Doncaster, would have been all over it. So as far as that's concerned, I don't think Celtic have actually broken any rules. So I don't think they should be punished in any way, shape, or form for that. But it's just such a stupid thing to do. Like, in terms of, I'm not talking about them being punished by the governing bodies, and unless it comes out that they have broken the rules. I'm more talking about like the responsibility that they have to their fans and to their millions of followers across the world, especially these guys that have shelled out £600, £700, £800 for a season ticket this year, and they're having to deal with watching their club just a comedy of errors. Like, just the decision making that's getting made from above is just laughable. Like, it's at every turn, and it's actually making Neil Lennon and his coaching staff look almost competent, and despite what they've been through this season, when you actually look at the decisions that have been made above them.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the game at Parkhead goes ahead tonight despite the host being told that 13 first-team players must self-isolate. I'm reading this from the BBC's website. It's a statement they've put out saying that the Scottish champions say that Christopher Julian was the player that tested positive for COVID-19 on return from the club's trip to Dubai. A local NHS health protection team has since deemed that 13 other players were in close contact and will now need to self-isolate. Manager Neil Lennon and assistant John Kennedy must also isolate as well. All 15 members of staff will also be absent for Saturday's game against Livingston. Celtic stress that the injured defender Julian was the only positive test, saying they are hugely disappointed by this decision, which kind of strikes a bit weird with me. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon urged Celtic to reflect seriously on the events that have unfolded here, this recent outbreak. Anthony, we've had a message from Joe Porter that Hibs should flat out refuse to play this match and force action from the SFA. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't say I agree with it, but I can certainly see that point of view, and I think it's a point of view that's quite widely held, certainly among Scottish football supporters in general, and I dare say probably a lot of Celtic supporters would endorse it. I think there's a lot of anger over this from the whole Scottish football fraternity, and including Celtic supporters. They're pretty affronted that the club have allowed this to happen. In terms of Hibs flat out refusing to play the match, I'm not sure what legal grounds they would have on that base, like to follow through on that. I mean, certainly I could understand if I was a Hibs player, I would definitely have concerns about playing. I mean, if you see somebody in your street breaking the rules, you generally don't want to go and talk to them because you know there's a good chance they've potentially got the virus or carrying it or whatever. So I can totally understand why Hibs players may not want to go and play this match, or whether just the general noises that seem to be coming out Easter Road today, that there are concerns in some quarters about them actually going ahead with the match. But I think when you break it down, fundamentally, as Stephen says, have Celtic actually broken any rules here? Would Hibs, I mean, I don't know if we've had situations like this before where opposition teams have threatened to not play a match. I think obviously because Celtic have gone to Dubai, it does look like their carelessness has caused this situation, which has generated a lot of anger. Often when a player contracts COVID, it's just seen as an innocent thing that could happen to anybody, which of course it can. So I think there's a danger of allowing sort of passions to get involved here in terms of Hibs just flat out refusing. If there is grounds for that on a sort of legal basis, then fair enough, I would totally back them in doing that. But certainly, I think, I mean, let's not forget, Hibs had concerns about this game getting moved long before this debacle unfolded. I mean, you can trace it right back to the point where Celtic actually booked the trip and Hibs didn't want the game switched to a Monday. This game was supposed to go ahead at the weekend, yesterday or Saturday. And Hibs made it clear they didn't want this game switched to the Monday to allow Celtic extra time from when they came back from Dubai. And that was just completely dismissed and the game got moved, which to me seemed absolutely ridiculous in the first place. I remember Hibs and Leanne Dempster being apoplectic with rage at the time that this fixture got moved in the first place. So Hibs are clearly pretty peed off at the game getting switched in the first place. And now they've got to come back to this situation where everything that people were worried about with Celtic going to Dubai has now come to fruition. And now the Celtic players, who knows whether any of them are carrying COVID from that Dubai trip that hasn't actually been detected yet, are going to go into battle with the Hibs players tonight. So it's a really murky situation. I can totally understand the general vibe that Hibs should not play the game and what have you. I totally get that. But ultimately it will come down to whether there's, I guess, legal grounds for them to pull out of it. But I mean, we're that close to kick-off now. I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. I think they're going to play the game, it looks like.
Yeah, thanks to Jamesy Graham as well. Hibs have got to think of their own safety. I think Chris Commons, former Celtic and Hibs player, come out and said that if he was a Hibs player travelling to Parkhead, he'd be petrified, Stephen. Now, in your own line of work, if you are being asked to go and visit another department or another building and you know there's been positive cases there, I mean, how would you be feeling about visiting their workplace?
I think a lot of this will come down to the fact that Hibs might not be happy about it and the players might not be very happy about it either. But if Hibs were to refuse to play this game, they would get absolutely carpeted because they don't have a legal precedence. They don't have anything backing up that decision to not play this game or to even threaten to not play the game. So in terms of, like, if Celtic had breached rules and they were awaiting an investigation by the SFA or they were awaiting an investigation by the SPFL, then you could understand the Hibs players then having a leg to stand on and say, listen, we're not playing this game. Until this investigation has been completed and we can be assured that we're safe, then we're not doing it. But the same as everything else in the world, like if you've got a choice, then fair play. But these guys are getting paid and getting paid handsomely, and they are afforded a lot of different things that you and I wouldn't get because they're in this sport, the professional sporting bubble or whatever you want to call it. If they were to choose not to do it, I think it would cause Hibs and those players a lot more problems than potentially would need to be done. But I get where you're coming from, and especially the guys who potentially have young families at home or live with people who have respiratory illnesses or things like that. They must be looking at this and thinking, this is a big risk. But you must look at every single game like that. It doesn't matter whether you've had one. Hearts have had 2 positive tests in the last 2 weeks. So the teams who were coming up against Hearts in the last couple of weeks may have been thinking the same thing. It's just one of these ones. Another thing that needs to be taken into consideration about this whole Dubai trip, right? Like, see the situation that Celtic are in, obviously with the league situation and being now 22 points behind Rangers. If they had chosen to just play one of those games in hand that they had and then play Hibs on the Saturday, like if all had gone well in those games, like say they'd played, I think like they've got to play Livingston twice in the next couple of weeks. So if they played Livingston and Hibs and beaten both of those teams, Rangers are going into that game against Aberdeen on Sunday and they are under not a massive amount of pressure, but they're under a lot more pressure than what they were, knowing that they could go 22 points clear and instead of the gap maybe being cut by an additional 6 points. So it's just, again, all round, just bad planning and bad PR for the club.
Yeah, no, Stephen, I've put this comment up because you touched on that as well. Stephen James has said instead of Celtic going to Dubai, they could have played one of their games in hand, which is exactly what you said. Yeah. So completely agree with that comment. Thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, it all boils down to this trip to Dubai, doesn't it, Anthony? I mean, if Julian had tested positive for COVID, there wouldn't have really been as much a big of an uproar as there would be because they went to Dubai. Was this trip really necessary at all, mate?
I don't think you can say it was totally unnecessary because there is a reason clubs go on these trips. They're good in terms of they give the. I mean, on a total football level, regardless of whether they're 19 points clear at the top of the league or 19 points adrift or 22 points now, I can understand them going to Dubai. I mean, it's irrelevant to me where they are in the league. If they can afford to go to Dubai, they're entitled to go to Dubai. But it's the fact they've gone in the middle of a pandemic. That's the issue. It's completely ignoring the sort of wider vibe in the world. I mean, going abroad to do some warm weather training, I totally get it. There's a lot of appeal. I mean, people will say they shouldn't be going because they're so far off the pace. I would argue that if you're not doing well in your work and you need a wee pick-me-up, going away with the lads to Dubai is a pretty good thing to do in normal world when COVID isn't a factor. So I have no problem with them choosing to go to Dubai when times were slightly better, which they were in October, November. Let's not rewrite history here. Although the virus was still here, people were allowed to travel and Celtic were clearly not told at that point that don't travel in January. Nobody said this to them. So I can understand them booking it. I can understand the logic of them wanting to go at that particular time. But the things have changed dramatically over the past couple of months, and they've changed probably. Celtic can probably argue that they've changed very rapidly, and the country's now in full lockdown, which it wasn't when they actually left the country. But I think the writing was on the wall pretty much since before Christmas when Nicola Sturgeon came out and, well, Boris as well, and they came out and said that you can't have this 5-day window over Christmas, which they'd initially promised us. So I think it was pretty clear then that we were in a serious predicament. And I think that was the time, if there wasn't already alarm bells ringing, Celtic should have said, right, okay, things have changed dramatically. We need to call this trip off. So, I mean, what was last Saturday? Last Saturday was, when was the derby? The 2nd of January. I mean, we found out a week to 10 days previously that the country was in a position where we were basically going into lockdown. So I don't know how Celtic have not sort of been aware of the sort of gravity of the situation. And fair enough, Celtic might have thought we can go to Dubai and keep our players safe. They're going to be just as safe in Dubai as they are in Scotland. You could argue all day on both sides of that, but it just doesn't look good flying out of the country in the middle of this. I mean, I still think it's even when teams are going out to play competitive games, it's still obviously a big risk, and you could make a case that shouldn't even be allowed. There's certainly people saying that the international football shouldn't have been going ahead a few months ago because players were coming back all the time testing positive. So to go abroad for what is effectively a training sessions in the sun, I just can't understand it. But going back to your original question, yes, I do see the logic in actually going abroad to train in the sun, because that's what teams tend to do at this time of year if they can afford it. So on a non-COVID level, if COVID's not a factor, no problem with Celtic going, even if they are miles off base in the league. But it's just the fact they've gone in this situation. We're in the middle of I don't know, I keep using the word pandemic, that's what it is, but just a massive global crisis. And it just, usually I can see both sides to every situation and how a situation's arisen. And I can see how this situation's arisen, but it should have been nipped in the bud in late December, if not at the very start of January. I know they went on like the day after the Rangers game, but it should have been nipped in the bud before it got to the point of getting on the plane.
Absolutely.
I just had a look on Twitter there to see if I could see if the team had been announced, the Celtic team had been announced yet, but it hasn't. But the one thing I have noticed is Chris McLaughlin, who's the head sports correspondent for the BBC, he's just tweeted that Hibs had requested an extra round of COVID tests be done before this game go ahead tonight, and the SFA rejected their proposal. They basically said, "Nah, Celtic have adhered to it. Go ahead, the game goes ahead." So it's setting up a massive thing. Like if it turns out after this game that there are players who've played in this who have potentially been asymptomatic when they've got those tests when they came back from Dubai, and they're now playing in this game tonight and playing against Hibs, this could basically collapse the whole league.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously,
it comes back to, they have 13 people are isolating, so in theory they are following the protocols exactly the same as you touched on with the Hearts situation when Ginnelly was out.
Yeah,
nobody could have refused to play Hearts just because Ginnelly was out, and certain players might have crossed paths with them in training. I mean,
to be honest, like
ultimately
to play
it boils
devil's
down to
advocate.
logic.
To play devil's advocate on it, the SFA have to draw the line in the sand somewhere. They have to have a like rules and regulations, and it might not look good. And if it turns out that further down the line that Celtic players are asymptomatic when they got the test and have played tonight, the SFA are going to argue again. Well, what else are we supposed to do here? Like you could argue that every single game would be called off, but it's just a mess. It's an absolute mess. It's just the last thing that Scottish football needed was another thing like this, and for us to have to talk about yet again something that isn't even happening on the football pitch is a sad indictment for Scottish football.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it the weekend.
The thing with this, it's easy to be wise after the event with anything that happens in football or in any walk of life. It's easy to say, oh, they shouldn't have done that with hindsight. The thing with this is, though, there were people, I remember, I think whoever was the commentator for Sky, it was Ian Crocker for the Celtic Rangers game, I'd completely forgotten Celtic were going to Dubai. It hadn't been publicised in the days leading up to Dubai as much. I knew they were going from when Hibs were annoyed about it a couple of months ago when the fixture got moved, but I'd completely forgotten they were going. So when the commentator on Sky said, oh, the Celtic players are jetting off to Dubai, that suddenly sparked a lot of people tweeting saying, what the hell's going on here? How are Celtic going to Dubai? So it wasn't like people are just suddenly getting angry about it now that they've actually gone and seen them drinking beer and what have you. People saw the perils of this trip before they actually took off. That's what makes it so baffling that they actually went ahead with it. I mean, I know you can still, just because a few people on Twitter aren't happy about it, doesn't mean you have to can the trip, but it shows that there was widespread concern before they actually left. And I just, as I said, I can usually see both sides of it. I can usually understand why certain things happen, but with this one, I think everybody at Celtic's going to be regretting this big time. I think Neil Lennon will know. I think Peter Lawwell will know this should not have happened. We've made a massive error here. And I think they owe it to their supporters. They owe it to the Scottish football fraternity. I mean, Celtic people might argue they don't owe anything to the Scottish football fraternity, but I think they certainly owe it to their supporters to come out and issue some kind of apology, not even an explanation. I think the supporters are fed up with explanations because they know they're going to be spun in a positive way. I think they almost need to hold their hands up and say, look, we've dropped the ball here. This should not have happened.
Yep. Now we've seen down in the Premier League down in England at the weekend, Aston Villa having to put out basically their under-20s team, whatever it may be, Stephen. It's still going to be quite a strong Celtic squad that will go out tonight, is it not?
Yeah, well, if the rumoured list of people who are going to be unavailable are proven to be correct, but they've not officially confirmed who's missing, who's available, who's not. So you're basically going on this. The Twitter rumours that were circling around this afternoon. Again, I don't know how reliable they are, but if they are to be believed, then I would say out of Celtic's at this moment in time first choice starting 11 that they seem to have played in the last few games, you would argue only Barkas, who hasn't exactly set the heather on fire, and Scott Brown, who again hasn't really been playing in the last couple of weeks. They're the only two first team starters that are potentially missing. So the only impact that this will probably have, again, and I'm stipulating if that list is to be believed, would be their bench. Their bench will be, I would imagine, packed with young guys that are coming up to. But again, the way Celtic have been playing, maybe not so much of recent, but some of these young guys, look at Sorrow and Turnbull and the impact that they've had in that starting 11. So it might not be a bad thing that these guys are being forced to be given a chance. Yeah,
so obviously with Kennedy and Lennon not being able to be in the dugout, is it going to be Gavin Strachan that's running the team tonight, Stephen?
Yes, Gavin Strachan, I think, is the kind of head coach, and then he's been assisted by Stephen McManus and Tommy McIntyre, I think, is the other youth coach. So it's basically two youth coaches are stepping up to help out with the first team. But Stephen McManus is obviously a former Celtic captain. He knows a lot. He's probably better placed than Gavin Strachan to be running that team. But I don't know how much impact that will have. Like, you've got a lot of experience in that team, and you would hope that these guys are going to kind of pull them through and just sort of take charge of it themselves. Guys like Callum McGregor and that they've been there, they've done it, they know what it's like to play for Celtic and what it takes to kind of cross that line. But this will not be an easy game for them. Hibs, as we spoke about last week, Hibs will be bang up for this game, especially now, given the fact that they'll feel the victims in this. They'll feel like they haven't been protected by the SFA, so they'll be angry and they'll go. So Celtic will need to be at it to get something out of this game. And if they fail to get something out of this game, then basically close the curtains, job done. And Celtic need to have a massive rethink about what they're doing going forward.
Yeah, one article I seen, Anthony, was from Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross, who's obviously an SFA assistant referee as well in the game. He said that at a time when people are staying at home, football games were something many look forward to. Now, I think he's right with this. If you remember during the lockdown one, we had the original lockdown, if you like, we got absolutely carried away and buzzing that Germany were bringing back football, and we got all excited and we're looking for streams for these German games that were happening. Are we taking Scottish football for granted? Because if this was taken away, we would miss it, and it would affect a lot of people's mental health, wouldn't it? Because what Douglas Ross is saying is a lot of people need this, they look forward to this on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. You're not going to catch me endorsing Scottish football getting shut down, whether it's the right thing to do or not. I'm not a turkey voting for Christmas. I want the football to stay on, whether that's selfish, I know. But if it's the right thing to do to shut it down for COVID reasons, then I totally understand that, because we had to do it before, and it may be that we have to do it again. Hopefully it doesn't go up, because I think certainly us three and everybody who's watching, football's the only sort of semi bit of normality in our lives, I would say, at the moment, in terms of having something just to talk about that's a wee bit normal. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely hate watching football with no fans. I'm finding it really hard to engage with it in terms of sitting down and watching 90 minutes. I find it real struggle. It doesn't feel real. There's something the supporters are missing, but I don't know why that is, but because the supporters are missing, I think it makes it far less watchable. It's not necessarily that the games are worse or anything like that. It just makes it less of a spectacle. And I find it hard enough as it is to engage with football without supporters, but it's still better than not having football. And all this nonsense about this has given us something to talk about. And if you take it all away and we go back to that nothingness of the summer without the good weather, then it's going to be a pretty grim winter. So I think from an entirely selfish perspective, I don't want the football to shut down. And I totally see all the arguments about it probably is I mean, probably it's keeping a lot of people going. Just the fact that their team is still on, they can download the stream on a Saturday afternoon and watch it. As mundane as it is, and I find it, as I said, I find it a real struggle. It is still better than nothing, and just knowing that a game's taking place. Whereas I think you almost forget how grim it was when there was literally no football and no sign of football for any period in the future. You didn't know if it was going to come back, so we don't want it to go back to that. But I dare say we have to be braced for the possibility that it could come back in the short term, especially poker breaking rules and taking liberties. So everybody needs to watch what they're doing, and certainly with that announcement today that the lower leagues are shutting down, that's what I was going to jump on to next. That all comes as obviously Nicola Sturgeon announces that Scottish football below the Championship level will be suspended for 3 weeks, Stephen. So in light of the current lockdown with Scottish Cup lower league ties, they'll all be rescheduled as well. Is like what Anthony says, is this just a sign of things to come, do you think?
I think they had to do something, to be honest. I think they had to, given the state of the country and given kind of what's going on, I think they needed to be seen to do something. And I think what they're thinking that's probably come into it is they could, with the greatest respect to League 1, League 2, Lowland League, Highland League and beyond, they can extend those seasons into the summer if they have to. Like, the reason they can't extend the Championship and more of an extent the SPL is that some of these players, maybe not a lot in the Championship, but some of these players are going to be potentially playing at Euro 2021 or what should have been Euro 2020. So the freedom isn't there to extend the season into that summer. So what they've done is potentially quite clever in terms of they're allowing a bit of a break in football. They're limiting the number of people who are taking part in these games and training. But at the same time, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens at the end of that 3 week or basically the start of February to see what happens in the meantime. If there's a bit of a come down in the cases, because you've got to remember a lot of people will be getting vaccinated in that time as well. So if you do see the numbers coming down, then I think that will give everybody a bit of a boost. And by the time that lower league football does return, then hopefully you've got to hope that the world will be, and especially Scotland, will be in a better place at that point. So I can see why they've done it, and I actually agree with the reasoning behind it. But I just think, as Anthony said, if there's going to be a potential that goes beyond... Sorry,
there's the Celtic team in. I'm just cutting you off, Stephen. There's the Celtic team.
Perfect. No, go for it, mate. Go for it.
Starting 11, Connor Hazard, Shane Duffy, Sorrow, Turnbull, Rogic, Mikey Johnston, Frimpong, McGregor, Harper, Welsh, Laxalt. So it's a mix, I suppose, of... I'm trying to identify who's actually out. Edward's out. Griffiths looks like he's out.
Ayer?
No Ayer. So yeah, I mean, the goalkeeper, there's no Bain or Barkas. So that team was wide of the mark, the one that was doing the rounds today. I mean, it's quite depleted, actually. McGregor's the captain. Laxalt would probably have started. Turnbull would have started. Beyond that, there's probably maybe only three or four genuine starters there. Still a pretty strong team. You would still expect them to give Hibs a game and possibly win the game. But certainly I think Hibs will be fancying their chances looking at that. But I mean, that's a problem for Hibs. Hibs have probably been preparing all week for playing a strongest Celtic 11, and they'll have had their... As much as you could say this is going to be far easier for Hibs, Jack Rossler prepared the team in a certain way throughout the past 8 or 9 days for playing this Celtic team that he thought they'd had probably a cautious mindset going into it. And now suddenly...
You're spot on, because Jack Rossell will have no idea how a Cameron Harper plays for Celtic. Like, he'll probably know who the guy is because he's a Scottish football manager, and he'll have no doubt looked at potential players that he could maybe get in, and he'll know who the guy is, he'll know his position, and he'll know basic information about him. But you're not telling me that Jack Ross has spent any time studying Cameron Harper, and his fullbacks will be the same. So if this young guy's running it, you've got no idea if he's going left, if he's going right, if he's going to go to the byline and cut it back, if he's going to cross early. So as you say, it causes potential problems for Hibs in that capacity.
it creates a shift in perception as well. There'll be a lot of Hibs fans thinking, "Oh, let's have these now. Let's go for it." But in reality, it's Celtic are probably still stronger on paper than Hibs are, even with those players going out. So it creates a lot of Hibs fans will be saying, "Oh, we should be going there and attacking and winning the game," and that may be a valid argument, but I dare say it'll be easier said than done to actually go to Celtic Park and turn that team over. I remember Scotland went to the Czech Republic, and it was a similar situation. Czech Republic lost all their players, and they had to bring in all these guys who ordinarily wouldn't have been playing. Everybody thought Scotland should win easy, and Scotland made real heavy weather of it and ended up winning by 1 goal. But they really struggled. So there's no guarantees that Hibs are going to. I mean, even looking at that team, I'd still expect Celtic to probably win the game. But there will be people who will look at that and say that's a Celtic B team. We should be going there and turning them on. So Jack Ross suddenly has to think, do we have more of a go than we initially would? I mean, Jack Ross, some Hibs fans say, is not as attacking as he should be, but I dare say they've probably gone there with the mindset that we can have a go. Martin Boyle, Christian Doige, Kevin Nisbet, we can go and cause them problems. But now he'll be in a dilemma. Do we have more of a go than we were initially going to have, or do we just stick with the original game plan that we've been working on for the past week? So it's a really sort of tricky situation from that perspective for the Hibs manager.
No, absolutely. And before the team was announced there, we were discussing obviously the lower teams that aren't going to be playing anymore for the next 3 weeks. One of the teams that will be affected, of course, is Bonnyrigg, Stephen. We almost witnessed an absolute giant killing at the weekend on Saturday evening. Dundee manager James McPake admits his side were lucky to get away with it against a well-organised Lowland League Bonnyrigg side. You must feel for the Bonnyrigg players as it finished after extra time, Dundee 3, Bonnyrigg 2.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of these ones where a lot of people, and I know Robbie Horn came out and sort of said, "Oh, listen, like my pride for these players and for the club outweighs any disappointment that I've got." I don't believe that for a second. Like I know Robbie Horn. I don't know him really well, but I know him enough to know that he's a football man, and any real football guy will know that when you're 3 or 4 kicks of the football away from securing a win like that, which would go down in the history books, and for the situation to then roll round again into extra time and they take the lead again, it is just heartbreaking of the highest order. But like, I know it's not going to mean anything to the guys of Bonnyrigg, but what they did was magnificent. Like, take away the fact that both of the penalties they got were no penalties, but out with that, like the way that they were organised, their goalkeeper was incredible. Like I just think that they were so well drilled, they were so well organised for a team who they're not only a part-time team. The level they play at, the amount of time that Robbie and his coaching staff must get to spend on the training pitch with these guys, for them to have been as well drilled as that against a good Dundee side. You've got to remember, like, there wasn't many changes from the Dundee team that absolutely skittled Hearts the week before. So it was a strong Dundee team who, let's be honest, were not massively at the races. And the second half, I think Jack Hamilton touched the ball twice in the second half, and both of them were with his feet. Like he didn't. The ball was barely crossing into their half. But that in itself is impressive. Like, we all know that in football, the hardest thing to do is organise a team that's, especially when you've got guys like Charlie Adam swinging balls in from any angle, from anywhere. So now, listen, massive credit to them, and it is a shame what happened, but at the same time, it's what happens in cup football. You know yourself, David. Last minute goals happen.
Do you know the goalkeeper, Mark Weir? Have you come across him?
I don't know him on a personal level. I do. I've been aware of the standard that he is. He's a very, very good goalkeeper. He went viral on YouTube a few years back. He was playing over in the States, and I think Michael Stewart maybe said that in his commentary that he scored from 110 yards from his own goal kick. It was a very good goal. So look that up on YouTube if you can find it. To answer your question, I don't know him personally. I know of him. I know he's a very highly rated goalkeeper. At that level, though, Anthony, does it show that maybe players like him and possibly Bonnyrig's Alan Horn, who also had a really good game, these sort of players who gave it all for 90 minutes against, like what Stephen said, a very strong Dundee team, could they be playing at a higher level?
Certainly could be. I mean, I wouldn't like to say that either of them could or couldn't on the basis of that one performance. I mean, there's always a danger. We've seen it often enough of guys that just have the performance of their lives in these sort of games, and generally week to week they don't always play at that level. I'm not saying these guys do play at that level or don't play at that level every week, so I'd be wary of saying on the basis of one performance that any of these guys could step up and play at a higher level. But I dare say if you're playing for Bonnyrigg, you could certainly you would like to think most Bonnyrigg players that are capable of playing at that level against Dundee could certainly go in at League 2, League 1 level and do a job. So, I mean, I'm sure there is a lot of talent in those. Some of these boys have dropped down. Lee Curry was a really good player for Berwick a few years back. So Bonnyrigg have clearly got a pretty talented team in terms of boys who at the top end of the Lowland League and capable of. I mean, going to Dundee, that's as you said, championship team that beat Hearts the week before. So, I mean, the way they played, there's every reason to suggest they probably could hold their own at a higher level if they got the chance. But I mean, ultimately, it's about getting the chance. There's only so many positions within teams higher up the food chain, so you just need to get lucky. You need a guy to take a chance on you, and then maybe there will be some managers in the league that will look at Mark Weir and say, "I'm going to give him a shot and bring him in." You never know what will happen. But it doesn't do anybody any harm if they have a game like that in front of the TV cameras when everybody's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back on some other games at the weekend, we'll start at Pittodrie, Stephen. Rangers are now 22 points clear at the top of the Scottish Premiership, and Alfredo Morelos' double was enough to beat the 10-man Aberdeen side. If you're a Celtic fan, that's kind of games like that for Rangers that you think that they might slip up. This could be where Rangers possibly drop points. But we keep saying this every week. Is it Rangers' title now? I mean, it's a 22-point gap, but we've not seen that being caught as long as I can remember anyway.
No. This is the thing that I kind of touched on earlier, that I just think that I'm not for a second saying that if Rangers were put under a bit more pressure that they would crumble. But it's an unknown quantity for Rangers. Majority of those Rangers players have never been in this position where they are the front runners and they're the ones being chased rather than they're the underdogs that are chasing. And I just think that see if you watch that game against Aberdeen, they looked, obviously they got 1-0 up. First of all, Aberdeen got the player sent off and they missed the penalty, and you're thinking, oh, this might not be Rangers' day. But they get 1-0 up, they're playing against 10 men. They then go 2-0 up, and you expect, right, this is just going to be a game-setting match. Rangers will be too professional for them, and they'll just shut this game down, or they'll push on and get a couple more, and this game will be done. But what I actually saw was Aberdeen took advantage of the fact that Rangers were really sloppy in terms of the fullbacks were pushing on so high, and I know they do this all the time, but they're pushing on so high at 2-0 down, 2-0 up against 10 men. They were leaving themselves wide open because Aberdeen had taken off their second striker and they changed the formation to just have Johnny Hayes and Matty Kennedy sitting just off of Sam Cosgrove and just basically chasing down fullbacks, chasing down lost causes. And that's where the goal came from. And you could see Stephen Gerrard was absolutely furious with those players that they had allowed this situation. So game management basically is the kind of name of the game at that point. And that's the point I was making earlier, that if Celtic had changed that situation to have been 6 points better off in that race, that puts Rangers under a lot more pressure than what they were. And if the same game had unfolded, you could see Rangers were rattled when that Aberdeen goal went in. And they were beginning to kind of misplace passes, and their movement wasn't as good up front, in the front three. But I just think that opportunities like this are not going to come along very often. There are not going to be many teams in the SPL that run Rangers close. And I think Aberdeen away is one of those fixtures that, as you say, if you're a Celtic fan, you're looking at that going, that's the opportunity. Easter Road away, that's an opportunity. Rangers are just going into these games. That's them taking 9 points off Aberdeen in 3 games. I mean, you just can't. You cannot see past them now. I can't see where they're going to drop another 6, 8, 10 points that Celtic will need to win the league.
Yeah, now one thing I took from the game as well was maybe 2 fingers up to the team across the city in Glasgow was Stephen Gerrard and the rest of the players all wearing face masks that they've not done in previous weeks. Did you pick up on that at all, Stephen? Did you see that?
I did see that, yeah. I don't know whether that was basically we're adhering to every rule here. Unlike you guys, we don't pick and choose. We'll do what we want. But nah, it's I just see if you are Rangers, you're just doing everything. You're ticking every box. You're crossing every T. You're dotting every I, because it is just a case of if they play to the level that they're supposed to play at every week from now to the end of the season, even if they come up against Celtic and Celtic are a better team than them than they were in the last game, they will still win the league. So that's the way that Steven Gerrard's got to look at it. Do your job. Do it to a level that you're expected. No one's asking you to go above and beyond the level that you're already at. Do your job properly for the next 4 or 5 months, and we will be the champions of this country. That's the way they need to look at it every single week.
Anthony, we moved down to Livingston, where it finished Livingston 3, Ross County 1. Another impressive victory for David Martindale as his perfect start as Livingston manager continues against Ross County, as 2 late goals gave him a 6th straight Scottish Premiership victory. What a start he's had. He's a man that we talk about every week on this show. They're currently sitting in 5th in the league. Surely if this run continues, there's going to be a chance that it could see his Livingston squad leapfrog the likes of Hibs and Aberdeen. Do you think so?
I don't necessarily think it'll happen, but certainly they've given themselves a chance that I don't think anybody would have imagined they would have maybe a month ago. Certainly if Hibs were to lose tonight at Celtic Park, then the belief will grow at Livingston that there is a wee chance of them sneaking into the top 4. I mean, certainly their form's good enough. It's just whether they can maintain it, which is the big question for any team, particularly out with Rangers or Celtic. Can you keep that consistency going? Generally, teams can't do it, so history would suggest they will hit a sticky patch at some point. And the other question is, will Hibs and Aberdeen drop off? Hibs or Aberdeen drop off enough to allow them to catch up? Certainly, Hibs are in a rut at the moment, and that was shown up by how well Livingston took them apart last week. But I mean, certainly in the current vein of form, you would fancy Livingston against most teams in the league. I mean, I must single out Scott Robinson. He's a guy I always liked at Hearts. I know a lot of people didn't. A lot of people thought he wasn't good enough for Hearts and were reasonably happy when he got moved on. He played as a sort of sitting midfielder in his last couple of years at Hearts, and I always thought he was very good. I could understand why people didn't rate him, but you could see he was a talented footballer, and he obviously just sort of circumstances went against him towards the end of his Hearts career in terms of he got injured just as Robbie Nielsen was coming in and Hearts were sort of going in a different direction. But he's dropped down the leagues and he ended up at East Fife part-time, and he's completely rebuilt his career, and now he's one of the best strikers in the league. And I'm sitting thinking now, would he be the sort of guy who Hearts would look to sign as a striker? Maybe not because they're looking for a target man, but certainly in terms of Scottish Premiership strikers, there aren't many in better form than Scott Robinson at the moment. The goals he's scoring are, I mean, that one yesterday was just pure quality. The lob.
See a story about Scott Robinson. So I remember when Hearts played Gillingham and Millwall in pre-season one year, and they were going down for Neil Harris, his testimonial for Millwall. And it was not long after Jim Jeffries and Billy Brown and Gary Locke had returned to Hearts. And we were in the airport going down to the game, and we were speaking to someone who was involved with Hearts, who I won't name, who was telling us that Scott Robinson had been put on the list of players to go down for this trip. And he at this time, he was only 16, 17, and the Hearts had thought, this guy's really good. He had went and knocked Jim Jeffries' door and said, right, I'm on this list to come for the trip. I want to know, am I coming as a striker or a centre midfielder? And Jeffrey says to him, well, we see you as a centre midfielder, so that's what you're coming to play. And he says, take me off the list, put someone else on. I'm only want to be here as a striker. And people saw that as like, what an arrogant wee guy, like what? But he had true belief in himself that this was his position. This was what he wanted to do. And obviously, after he left Hearts, as Tony quite rightly points out, his career kind of stagnated and went downhill a wee bit. But he's now getting back to a level where he looks, as Anthony quite rightly said, he looks like he's within that top 5-6 strikers in the entire league. So good on him for having that belief in himself. He might not have went about it the right way in terms of like dealing with an old school manager like Jim Jeffries. But I think if you look at where he's ended up and how his career's gone, you have to take your hat off to him and to have that self-belief in yourself and believe it and keep going and keep chapping on the door. Look what happens. So he's a good story for any kid to kind of look at and believe in yourself and look what's possible.
Absolutely, mate. And while we're talking about Hearts, obviously they've went out and they've signed Gary Mackay-Stevens this week, Anthony. Is he a good addition to that Hearts squad?
Yeah, I think I don't think you'll find any arguments about that signing. It's one that's probably on a par with Craig Gordon and Liam Boyce in terms of pedigree, calibre, whatever you want to call it, in terms of him being a proven Scottish Premiership player. I think it would be a surprise. I mean, if he's not going to do it at Hearts, it's probably going to be down to fitness reasons rather than ability, because it was only 18 months or so ago that he was playing in the league to a good level at a team that routinely finishes in the top three. So yeah, I mean, he's proven at Dundee United, at Aberdeen, and obviously he struggled a bit at Celtic in terms of nailing down a position, but he's had himself in the Scotland squad as well. So he's only 30-year-old as well, so he should still have a good bit left in the tank. And Hearts are sort of crying out for a quality wide player to step in, especially with Ginnelly being in and out. So I mean, it's a logical signing. I'd be surprised if it didn't work out. As I said, it would be. The only way I can see it not working out is if he gets plagued by fitness issues, which obviously can happen with anybody who comes to Hearts these days. But yeah, very good signing. I think if the window shut tomorrow, Hearts could say they've made a quality signing. I dare say they'll probably want to add a striker as well. But certainly it's a good start to the window for them.
Absolutely. If we look back at games over the weekend as well, Stephen, we'll hop along the M8 to Paisley, where it finished St Mirren 1, Motherwell 1. Graham Alexander's first game in charge. He's come out and said he thinks he's got a good base to build on at Motherwell, despite being pegged back by St Mirren in his first match in charge. When we were talking about the vacancy at Fir Park last week, Stephen, it was a name that never cropped up. Do you think he's a good appointment?
Stephen gone missing.
I think we've lost him. Either that or he's good at musical statues. Anthony, we've just got yourself. It's just the two handsome ones. What do you think on his appointment at Fir Park? Is Graham Alexander the manager to get Motherwell out a bit of a rut that they're in?
I'd be lying if I said I knew enough about him to speak with authority about what he's going to do to Motherwell and what way he's going to play and how he's going to go about his business. But certainly he's got a good decade of experience under his belt in the English lower leagues. He certainly did well at Fleetwood, and he obviously will have a knowledge of Scottish football on the basis that he played for Scotland. And so, I mean, I did say last week that Tommy Wright I felt was a standout candidate, but then I was maybe being a wee bit insular in terms of looking at obvious candidates who are already affiliated to the Premiership with and have experience in this league. But I did say that Motherwell have a habit of looking outside the box, and generally when Motherwell do that, they come up trumps. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he proves to be a shrewd appointment by them. Yeah,
no, nice to have you back, Stephen. Did you top up the broadband bill there, mate?
I got the hamster back on the wheel, mate. He's just...
Nice one. We were just talking about Graham Alexander's appointment at Fir Park. Is he a man that you thought... Because we never talked about him last week, and Anthony's kind of answered the question, so we'll move on because we're a bit struck for time. We talked about possibly Hearts looking for a forward. One person that kind of stands out for me in that position is the guy Kiltie at Kilmarnock, who got a double in their 2-0 win over Hamilton Accies at the weekend. Stephen, do you think he'd be a good addition at Hearts, or has he maybe caught the eye of other clubs as well?
He seems... I think Greg Kiltie's more of a sort of Gary Mackay-Stevens type player. I think he's more of a sort of wide... Right. Attacking midfielder sort of player. He does score a lot of goals for Kilmarnock, and he is out of contract at the end of the season. Killie, I've already said, like they've obviously let Eamon Brophy leave now to go to St Mirren, even because he had signed the pre-contract. So he'd left, and he's now, I think he's joined them on loan until the end of the season, and then obviously he joins them full time. And Alex Dyer has already publicly sort of stipulated we're not going to be renegotiating anybody's contract until we kind of know that we're safe in the league. I think financially they obviously can't tie themselves down to anything that's going to cripple the club going forward. So you can kind of understand it from their point of view. But I think if you're a club like Hearts, and I'm not meaning this in any sort of arrogant way to say Hearts have got more money than anyone else, but in terms of financial footing, Hearts seem to be in quite a strong position at this moment in time, especially given the fact that we are one of the Championship clubs who received the £500,000 grant from the government. So I think players like him, maybe not him as an exact example, but any player who their club can't currently negotiate their contract with them, who we could potentially get on a Bosman deal. And I know that that's maybe a bit underhand and taking advantage of clubs, but that's what happens in football. These things happen all across the world, all across any league, any game. You will see bigger clubs, and I'm not saying that Hearts are a bigger club than anybody else, but in terms of financially, they could go and take advantage of players like this. And Greg Kiltie is just a tip of the iceberg. I think there's going to be loads of players who will potentially be looking for that financial security, and they want, because the last thing they want is to become a Stephen O'Donnell. Stephen O'Donnell decided to leave Kilmarnock, and then a global pandemic kicks in, and he can't get himself a club, and he's ended up on a short-term deal at Motherwell. Nobody wants that to happen. So if you're now going and being able to offer any player a 2-year deal, coming and playing for a club like Hearts, I think they'll be able to take their pick at any of the out-of-contract players that they want. So that, to me, that's a line of business they should be looking to do.
Yeah, other transfer news that's went on over the last couple of days. Hibs are possibly looking at Jackson Irvine and bringing him back to Scotland. They've obviously made a move and brought in the Arsenal goalkeeper. Is it Matt Macy, I believe his name is? So they've brought him on board. Do you think Jack Ross will recruit well, Anthony? Is he a good... Is that his sort of strong point as a manager, recruitment-wise?
Certainly, since he's come to Hibs, he certainly seems to be looking at guys who have got some sort of track record when it comes to Scottish football. I mean, he went and took Nisbet out of the lower leagues, and McGuinness. He's taken a few guys that he knew previously from St Mirren. And I dare say if they were to sign Cadden and Jackson Irvine, they would be two players that would sort of be similar to... I'm saying similar to, it's not really similar to McGuinness, but in terms of being highly regarded Scottish... Irvine's not even a Scottish player, but he's done well in the Scottish Premiership before. So I think there's definitely... Jack Ross clearly is prioritising guys who have done well in the league before and have some sort of track record of standing out, because I think you would say Irvine was one of Ross County's best players when he was here, and certainly Cadden was his star was on the rise when he was at Motherwell. So I can see the logic in both those signings, and they do tend to be the type of signings that Jack Ross is looking to make, certainly on the basis of what he's done since he's come to Hibs.
Yeah, something we don't see very often, Stephen. Lewis Stevenson is about to make his 500th appearance for Hibs tonight. His teammate Paul Hanlon reckons the 33-year-old deserves a new contract. I mean, what an accolade that is to roll since 2005, 500 appearances for Hibernian.
Nah, listen, Lewis Stevenson has been at Hibs for the entire time that I've been supporting Hearts, so he's a guy that I've abused on many an occasion, but you've got to take your hat off to Lewis Stevenson. Massive respect for anybody who's been basically a one-club man. He is, I think, the only player in Hibs history, well, he's got to be the only player in Hibs history that's won the League Cup and the Scottish Cup, so he will be up there with the most decorated Hibs players in the modern era. So, listen, good on him. He's stuck around. He's seen off many a manager, and there's been many a time where it's looked like his days are done at Hibs, and he's gone away. And every single time he comes back, he's a steady Eddie, a reliable guy. And as much as it pains me to show any praise to a Hibs player, fair play to the guy. He's had a good career.
Yeah, just some other transfer news quickly. I'm aware of the time. Rangers are apparently interested in Wigan Athletic striker Kyle Joseph. They face competition from Tottenham, getting him. Scott Wright from Aberdeen as well. I believe they're interested in trying to get hold of him. And Celtic, John Kennedy, he's hinted that Scott Brown should be offered another 12-month playing deal. Now, I read into that, Anthony, if he's been offered a playing deal, does that maybe mean that there could be a coaching role for him at Parkhead, possibly?
I think if Scott Brown wants a coaching role at Parkhead, he'll get one. I don't think maybe there is some doubt about it, but I would imagine that would be a natural progression for him if that's the road he wants to go down, assuming he doesn't want to drop down the leagues and play for another club. I've always felt he might have gone back to Hibs to see out his career, but obviously he is at an age where he's 35, 36 now. Would he actually be of benefit to Hibs going forward? That would be the question, I guess. But I know people say he's done, he's finished and all that. I mean, I would, if I was Neil Lennon, I would keep him on. Whether you're going to play him week in, week out, I would keep him on just because of what he brings to the dressing room. I think he's been Mr. Celtic for the past 10, 15 years. And I know there is a bit of a clamour to get him out because people want fresher legs in there. I totally understand that. But I think his experience is invaluable and just his general presence at the club. So I would be certainly, if I was part of Celtic management, I would want to keep Scott Brown in there in some capacity. But ultimately, I guess it will come down to whether he still wants to play regularly. whether he wants to wind down and go into a coaching role. What's next for him?
Yeah. If you look ahead to some of the fixtures that are happening this week, tomorrow we see Dundee United host St Johnstone. That's a game that was postponed at the weekend. It's a 6:30 kick-off tomorrow. On Wednesday, Livingston host Aberdeen. On Friday, we return back to Championship action. Greenock Morton host Dunfermline. On Saturday, it's Celtic, Livingston. Hamilton Accies host Dundee United. Hibs are at Easter Road against Kilmarnock. It's Ross County against Aberdeen. And St Johnstone are playing St Mirren. In the Championship, Alloa, they welcome Hearts to the Indodrill Arena, if you like. Dundee, they are hosting Ayr United. Queen of the South are playing Arbroath, and it's Raith Rovers against Inverness Cally Thistle. We'll be talking about all those games on next week's show. You might have noticed that we were on half an hour early tonight. That's due to obviously the Celtic Hibs game happening and the studio colliding with our sister station, A Celtic State of Mind. They're going to be covering the game at 7:15 pre-match. At half-time they'll be discussing the key points as well, and also at full-time as well, so make sure you tune into that. Before you go, guys, I just want a quick prediction on how you see tonight's game panning out. Stephen, what do you think the score will be?
2-1 to Celtic.
2-1 Celtic. Anthony?
2-0 Celtic.
2-0 to Celtic, both saying Celtic. I will go with, I'll say 2-1 Hibs, just to be a wee bit different. On behalf of myself, Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons, thanks for tuning in this week, guys. We'll see you at 6:30 next Monday, back to the usual time, for another episode of the Play On podcast.